3 knocks echoed through the night, slow, heavy, as if something on the other side of the door was trying to tear its way into the room. Rachel Monroe froze in the pitch-dark living room, the lone table lamp casting a shaky circle of light. The wall clock read exactly 2:13 a.m. She didn't dare move closer to the door. Outside, the wind was dead still, yet the window rattled like an invisible hand was pressed against it. Her throat was bone dry. Clutching the kitchen knife that trembled in her grip, Rachel edged back toward the hallway. The darkness in the house felt thicker now, swallowing everything it touched. At the end of the hall, the old crooked mirror caught her reflection, except something was wrong. The woman in the glass wasn't afraid. That Rachel stood tall, her eyes hollow, her lips twisted into a mocking smile. And then, her reflection raised a hand and tapped the mirror. 3 times, the same sound as the knocks on the door. Rachel screamed, stumbling back as Rachel had just left the newsroom in downtown Denver, October winds cutting through her coat like ice. She was exhausted, and even the heavy jacket wasn't enough to stop the shiver that came after a day buried in lifeless stories. Car crashes, local politics, numbers without a pulse. Deep down, she ached for something real, something strong enough to pull her out of the deadlock journalism had become. That's when her phone buzzed, an anonymous email. Subject line only, Ashbrook the knocking at 2:13. Inside was a single short paragraph. If you want the truth about the disappearances in Ashbrook County, come to the town. Ask about the house at the end of Willow Road. But remember, never open the door when you hear the knocking. Rachel frowned. Ashbrook, the name was faintly familiar, tugging at a memory of a story she'd skimmed the year before. People vanishing without a trace, no bodies ever found. The police had chalked it up as voluntary departures, but the rumors had whispered something else. Another reporter might have ignored it. Rachel couldn't. She'd always been drawn to the shadows other people avoided. And in a moment of weakness, she hit reply, "I'll come." 3 days later, she was driving into Ashbrook. The small town sat buried in the mountain woods, smothered in thick fog. The welcome sign was old and sagging, its paint peeling into ghostly streaks. People on the street watched her with strange, shuttered eyes, as if hiding something. In the town's only coffee shop, Rachel asked about the house at the end of Willow Road. The place fell silent. An elderly woman with silver hair trembled as she hurried out the door. The young barista only shook his head, whispering, "You shouldn't get involved. Around here we don't talk about it." Rachel was no stranger to suspicious silence. She simply smiled, sipped her coffee, and jotted in her notebook, "Ashbrook, a collective fear?" What she didn't know was that later that night in a roadside motel room, when the clock struck exactly 2:13 a.m., someone or something would knock 3 times on her door. Rachel jolted awake. In the damp motel room, the digital clock glowed a harsh red, 2:13 a.m. She held her breath. 3 knocks rang out, slow, deliberate, at the door. Her neck went rigid. She waited a few seconds, telling herself it might just be some drunk guest at the wrong room. But when she finally stood and reached for the knob, her hand froze. From under the door, something black was seeping in, thin and smoky, crawling across the floor in a slender streak. Before she could touch it, it vanished. Sleep was gone. She sat awake until dawn, dark circles etched under her eyes. The next day, Rachel walked down Willow Road. The place felt cut off from the world, heavy woods pressing shadows even in daylight. The narrow road was broken with potholes, ending at a sagging wooden house. Its roof dipped, windows boarded up, yet Rachel swore she could feel something alive inside, as if the house itself was holding its breath. A voice behind her made her jump. A gaunt, middle-aged man stood there, coat worn thin, face weathered and hollow. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped. "And you are? Just someone who survived." He never gave a name, only a warning. "When you hear the knocking, never answer. If you want to live, leave Ashbrook before nightfall." Then he slipped into the trees, his thin frame swallowed by the woods. Rachel's gut told her he knew the truth, but fear was already spreading in her chest. Last night hadn't been a dream. Something had found her. That evening, she visited the town's tiny library. Dust clung to the shelves, the yellow light of old bulbs barely cutting the gloom. She dug through brittle papers until she found a local paper from 1979. "Family of 3 vanishes without a trace at 77 Willow Road. No bodies, no clues. Since then, more disappearances. Every single one tied to the house." The library was empty, except for an elderly librarian hunched over her books. When Rachel approached the desk, the woman lifted her head. Her eyes were bleak. "You're looking into that house?" "Yes. It doesn't knock to come in. It knocks to see who's listening. And once you notice it, it follows you." Rachel swallowed hard. Before she could press for more, the librarian turned away and refused to speak again. That night, back in her motel, Rachel double-locked the door. She left the lights on, laptop glowing beside her. But when the clock clicked over to 2:13, everything went dark at once. The room collapsed into heavy blackness. Knock. 3 times, this time not at the door but from the walls. Then the ceiling, then directly beneath the bed. Rachel gripped the small knife in her hand. The air itself seemed to shrink around her. In the bathroom mirror, left slightly ajar, her reflection was waiting. Face blank, lips pulled into a warped grin. She lunged forward and yanked the curtain across the glass. But when she lowered her hand, the knocking hadn't stopped. Now it was inside her, pounding from within her own chest. Rachel hadn't slept a wink after the second night. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, her nerves strung tight as wire, but her resolve had only hardened. If she didn't dig deeper, the knocking would never stop. She went back to the same coffee shop, the one where the townsfolk always avoided her gaze. When she sat down, the young waitress, a brown-haired girl named Ellie, hesitated before walking over. You're still here?" Ellie asked. "I'm here for the truth." Ellie glanced around, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "My grandmother used to live on Willow Road. I never set foot there. I wouldn't dare, but there are still some things in her basement. You might want to see them." She slipped Rachel a rusted key. "Just don't go alone." That afternoon, Rachel followed the directions to a small wooden house. It had been abandoned for years, the floors groaning under her weight, the air thick with mildew. Even though it was broad daylight outside, the inside was swallowed by shadows. She flicked on her flashlight and traced the creaking steps down to the basement. In the far corner sat a wooden chest with a loose lock. Rachel slid the key in. The hinges screeched, dust exploding into the air. Inside lay a rotting leather-bound journal, its yellowed pages covered in frantic handwriting. 2:13 a.m. It knocked again. We covered the windows, prayed every prayer we knew, but nothing worked. When my husband heard it, he opened the door and vanished. No scream, just cold, empty air. On the next page, a smear of dried blood trailed across the paper. I heard him calling my name from the mirror, his voice so familiar, but his eyes were nothing but black hollows. I couldn't bear to look. I know if I answer it will come for me. Rachel shivered, clutching the journal tight. She had uncovered something buried deep. Then, footsteps creaked above her, slow and deliberate. She froze, snapping off her light. Someone was moving around upstairs. The steps grew closer, stopping right at the top of the basement stairs. Knock. 3 times. The sound echoed down into the dark. Rachel hugged the journal against her chest, heart hammering. The darkness seemed to press the air from her lungs, forcing her into silence. Then, at last, the footsteps retreated. The basement door closed with a heavy final click. When she turned the flashlight back on, another object had appeared in the corner. A fractured mirror. The beam didn't reflect in it. Instead, 2 hollow eyes stared back at her, locked on her every breath. Rachel spun and bolted, racing up the stairs and out into the daylight, cold sweat soaking through her shirt. Back at the motel, she opened the journal again. The further she read, the more horrifying the truth became. House number 77 on Willow had once belonged to the Blackwood family. A carpenter husband, a schoolteacher wife, and their little girl. On the night of October 13, 1979, neighbors reported hearing the same knocks over and over. By morning, the entire family had vanished. Since then, anyone who stepped into or even lived near that house had been marked. The knocking would follow them until they either opened the door or answered it. The final entry was scrawled in a trembling hand. If you are reading this, burn the house down. But don't trust the light. It knocks too. It steals voices of those you love, and it knows exactly what you fear. Rachel sat frozen, hands shaking so violently the ink blurred beneath her fingers. Her phone buzzed, an unknown number. She answered. Rachel. A man's voice. Her blood ran cold. It was her father's voice, dead 4 years now. Rachel, open the door. It's me. Then came the knocking. 3 sharp raps against her motel door. 2:13 a.m. Rachel froze at the motel door, phone still clutched in her hand. Her father's voice echoed through the receiver, tender and familiar, but at the tail end of each word was a strange distortion, warped like it was rising from the bottom of a well. Rachel, open the door. You're safe now. 3 knocks struck again, this time rattling her bones. The doorknob trembled, as if a hand on the other side was trying to twist it. Rachel backed away, but the mirror on the wall cracked, shards splintering outward. In the fractured glass, she saw her father smiling back at her, except his eyes were bottomless pits of darkness. She screamed, hurling the phone. The screen went black, but his voice kept seeping through the room. Rachel, you wouldn't leave your father, would you? Panic surged. Rachel crashed through the window, glass exploding around her as she leapt into the parking lot. Blood streaked her hands from the cuts, but she didn't stop running. Something chased her, cold and suffocating, like fog filling her lungs. She sprinted until she reached the abandoned church at the edge of town. The rotted doors gave way under her weight. Inside, pews lay thick with dust, and the crooked cross above the altar hung as if ready to fall. From the shadows, the middle-aged man who had once warned her on Willow Road stepped forward. You've drawn its attention now, he said, his voice rough and grave. You know what it is? Rachel gasped. He shook his head. Not a ghost, not a demon. It's darkness, wearing the voices we love. And it won't stop, not until you face it inside its lair. Rachel clutched the journal tight. House number 77. The man nodded, pity in his eyes. If you go in there, you may not come back. But Rachel already knew her choice. She couldn't run. The knocking would follow her until it took everything. That night, she returned to Willow Road. The wind screamed through the trees, fog thick as cement, as though hiding something that watched her. The front door of the house stood slightly ajar, waiting. The moment she stepped inside, the air shifted. The temperature plummeted, her breath spilling in white mist. Her flashlight flickered, catching claw marks carved into the walls, signs of others who had tried to escape. On a rotting table sat a small wooden box. Rachel opened it. Inside were dozens of scraps of paper, each with a name. Names she'd seen before in missing persons reports. And at the bottom, written in fresh ink, Rachel Monroe. Her reflection smiled back at her. Only it wasn't hers. It was laughing, with blood trickling from its eyes. It raised a hand and knocked 3 times on the glass. "Trade places with me, Rachel. Just put the knife down." The whisper drilled into her skull like a command. Her hand shook as she raised the kitchen knife. The reflection's eyes bored into her mind, dredging up her father's deathbed, the guilt of never saying goodbye. His voice came again, soft, pleading, "Rachel, help me. Open the door for me." The darkness pressed close. The mirror quivered. Black hands tore through the glass, reaching for her. Rachel screamed, driving the knife forward with all her strength. The mirror shattered with a piercing crack, shards exploding outward as the darkness burst apart, scattering into a storm of fragments that ripped through the house. And then, silence. Rachel gasped for breath, knife still clenched in her bloody hand, drops pattering on the frozen concrete floor. Slowly she looked up. The last shard of mirror still standing showed a reflection. But it wasn't her. It was the other Rachel, still smiling. The basement shook with the knife strike. Shattered glass sprayed everywhere, shadows retreating like a cold wind pulled back into the void. Rachel collapsed to the floor, lungs burning, convinced she had destroyed it. But then, frozen horror. A single slab of mirror remained, tall as a doorway. In it, the other Rachel still stood, bloodied face, empty eyes, half a grin. "You thought it was over?" it whispered, echoing straight into her bones. Rachel stumbled to the stairs. Shadows clutched weakly at her legs as she forced her way up. She burst out into the breaking dawn. Behind her, the house cracked apart, roof collapsing inward as if burned from within. She fell to her knees in the road, blood dripping from her torn hand. She had survived. 2 days later, Rachel left Ashbrook. The Blackwood Journal sat on the passenger seat. She had meant to abandon it, yet some pull made her keep it. Crossing mountains and towns, she returned to Denver. Turning her apartment key, she felt like she had finally escaped a nightmare. For a few days, life seemed normal. She ate, slept, drafted her exposé on Ashbrook. Every brush of the journal sent a chill through her spine, but she pushed it aside. She had won. On the 3rd night, Rachel woke to silence. The clock read 2:13 a.m. Sweat trickled down her temple. Then, knock. 3 sharp raps from the apartment door. Not just one door. Knocking spread walls, windows, even from the bathroom mirror. A voice rose clear and familiar. "Rachel, you brought me with you." Rachel grabbed the journal. Pages flipped on their own, scrawled handwriting etching fresh across the bottom line. New mark chosen, Rachel Monroe. The pounding grew relentless. She remembered the churchman's warning. It only stops when you face it directly. She wrapped the journal, stuffed it in her pack beside the knife. No more pretending. If she ran, it would follow until she opened the door. Rachel stepped into the dark before dawn, carrying her resolve like steel. This time she wouldn't just survive, she would hunt it. Back inside, the clock struck 2:13. Knock. 3 times, echoing the walls. The darkness waited, smiling.